Oh man, I gotta say, really sorry about this. I made this in like the span of a week, so I apologize. It's not a particularly fancy video. Well, let's run it anyways. Let's go. There's a decent number of otaku in My Dress Up Darling. There's her, there's her, there's him. For the 4 people on the internet who don't know what the show is, it's about 2 primary characters. Wakana Gojo, an apprentice doll maker who makes cosplay clothing for Hina Dolls for whatever reason. I'm not entirely sure. Roshi's hot! Anyhow, I need to talk about my sponsor, because if I don't, I'm gonna forget, and then they're not gonna sponsor me next time. All right. Okay, so let's change this up. All right. Okay, let's go with that. This video has been sponsored by the beautiful people at Boxu. Now, a lot of you are probably just like, Joe, I already know what you're gonna say. I watch Gaijin Goomba, but let me run a scenario by you, okay? Because I don't think you've thought about this sort of situation yet. All right. Imagine this. You're in the middle of the desert. No, worse, Cheyenne, Wyoming. And you're trying to get to the single Asian grocery store. But wait a minute, what's that? That's right, you're surrounded by goons. How are you gonna get in? And how are you gonna get your premium Japanese snacks? For most people, they'd be like, oh, I just barge in because I'm not scared of a bunch of goons. Realistically, it's a trick question because you don't even get these snacks in the Chinese store that you're supposed to go to in Cheyenne, Wyoming. That's the thing about Boxu. You're gonna get premium tea pairings and Japanese snacks. I know that they're legitimate because why? Because my package shipped out all the way from Osaka, Japan. So I assumed all the promotional material was originally written in Kansai Ben. They give you different snacks every single month, so you're gonna be getting something different. And if you like any single thing, you can always purchase it from their store directly. And look, if you order it now, they're doing a March Sakura viewing themed kind of thing. It comes in all pink. I know some of y'all there like pink, because you're really into anime, and you can see some of the stuff right now. The jelly, for instance, my mom thought I was poisoning her because she thought it was perfume. Look, I have a lot of affinity for Boxu. I love them. I love their product. I love their company. Okay, because they reached out to me, and then they're just like, oh, what could this guy possibly do? Put our sponsorship on the worst performing video he's ever done in like years? He's not going to do that. If you're interested in getting Japanese snacks, you can save 10% up to $47 if you use my code. That's right, Altasair10. Maybe you're living in a place you can't go Sakura viewing, but you know what you can do? You can watch anime. You can watch My Dress Up Darling while eating Japanese snacks, thanks to Boxu. Funny enough, that brings me back to watching My Dress Up Darling, because while I was watching the show, I actually had a question. Would Gojo be considered an otaku? Now, at a glance, he doesn't seem particularly otaku. He's not that big into anime or manga. I mean, yeah, he plays Gaogays, but that just seems to be part of the gig. That's how he sees it. But let's talk about the thesis. Gojo probably isn't an otaku, but his character arc is deeply focused on handling issues of gender. And what it does is it expands into a broader examination of performativity. And it's appropriate that he finds an ally in an otaku because for the longest time, these have been some of the problems otaku have faced. Now, performativity, for the sake of this video, refers to gestures and ideas which are acted and conversely acted upon to present an identity. To be is to do. And so one of the big questions is, what should you do to present yourself as what you aim to be?
To say that gender is performative is a little different, because for something to be performative means that it produces a series of effects. We act and walk and speak and talk in ways that consolidate an impression of being a man or being a woman.
Then why otaku? Like, why can't this video just be about performativity in general? So, as I was editing this video, I realized that it's probably a bad idea to explain something as challenging as performativity in the span of, like, 2 sentences. So, I'm going to try 2 paragraphs. People often get performance and performativity mixed up. Performance is built on this idea that I have a stable identity, and what I do is an expression of that identity. With performativity, we don't come in with a pre-configured or stable identity. Instead, our actions in the world build an identity. So, a performative is something that reinforces itself through doing. The result, of course, is that 1, it's very unstable, 2, it isn't chosen, and 3, it's imposed upon us. The implication here is that we don't have a true self that picks or defines these actions, but that we are composed of these actions and its consequences. For example, it doesn't matter if you choose to act like a loser or not. If you act in a way society considers as things losers do, you're a loser. But that also means if society's beliefs about what makes a loser changes, then your status as a loser changes. If we want to talk about it in the context of like a media example, right? Mizuki from Boku Girl, which I spoke about in a separate video 3 years ago, is one such example, right? Mizuki starts off as a guy, and then she loses her ding-dong to the Joker. But the story doesn't end at her sex change. Her gender follows, but not immediately or naturally. The whole story is about learning to do things that constitute woman that makes her a woman. The trueness of Mizuki's status as a woman is not defined by her bodily transformation, but by starting to do more things that women do. And you can see how, on the other hand, when she was a male, despite her attempts to be a man, she acted in so many ways that would be considered womanly, that it undermined her intentions. So, in other words, these are things outside of her, beyond her. So why am I mentioning this? Later on in the video, I use a lot of action verbs, which implies that the characters chose things, but that's not my intention. I just wanted to clear the miscommunication before anyone comes in guns blazing. Sorry about that. Back to the show. To most Western fans, otaku is often used like an Orientalist version of weeb, someone who's really into anime and manga. But otaku, and the history of otaku taken seriously, is kind of fraught. For example, it's actually quite difficult to pin down exactly what they are. In Otaku, the struggle for imagination, anthropologist Patrick Galbraith is somewhat reticent to clearly define what the otaku are. He's more interested in charting specifically who the otaku seem to be and the challenges they seem to face. So, in terms of performativity, what are the challenges they're facing? So in Japan, there's this increasingly antiquated but orthodox imagination of masculinity as a salaryman, that being manly is to work, to fall in love with a woman, to go home, and to be a family man. Otaku kind of buck that trend because they don't feel like they need to do that. And as a result, they're often maligned by outsiders as failed people. And that's really interesting. The usage first really exploded with a set of controversial essays by Nakamori Akio, who, after going to Komiket in the 80s, described otaku as failed men.
And while they're still men, and entering puberty, they'll start having erotic desires. But if you look at their style, the way they talk, and their character, it's clear that they'll never get women. Otaku definitively lack male skills, so they're content with carrying around pinups of anime characters like Miki Momo and Nanoko. Maybe I'll call it the two-dimensional complex. They can't even talk to real women.
They're quite literally not getting bitches and stacking no paper. Nakamori's infamous essays not only caused a bit of a stir with their publication in the magazine Manga Buriko, they were also deeply gendered. Otaku, in this sense, referred to men, cis heteronormative men, who couldn't attract women. But the essays also insidiously, deeply insidiously erased women. It's important to note that Komiket, one of the quantifiable sites of otakudom, didn't start as a reserve army of sweaty dudes, but that its early years were dominated by women. So there's this theme here, right, through the otaku DNA. To be an otaku is to deal with being stereotyped or labeled by outsiders. In 1983, they were a reserve army of failed men. 1989, they were a legion of child molesters and serial murderers. 1996, they were dangerous cultists masquerading as sci-fi geeks. 2005, they were losers with disposable income, ready to grow up as long as they meet the right women. 2008, they were gawkable, careless malcontents who can't even keep their own communities in check. The otaku identity is deeply concerned with rules, expectations, and guidances impressed upon them, social cues that are already there, whose narrative is rarely one they completely call their own. It's a consolidation of expectations, many bad, about who these nerds are and what makes them wrong. It is one deeply concerned with performativity, especially in the context of this video's concerns about what is considered a failed person. So, how do you handle that? Let's talk about my dress-up darling. So, let's be clear here. I'm aware of these straightforward messages in my dress-up darling. Be yourself. Don't get hung up on whatever people say. A hobby worth devoting to is its own prize. I see it. I have eyes. So before anybody goes, oh, bro, it's not that complicated, okay? Do not overthink this.
Who
All right, I don't care. All right, okay, I don't care. Home slice. All right. The show is a lot more sympathetic to otaku concerns than you might think, and more so, it acts as a bridge into some of the more weighty and abstract problems otaku face, especially in terms of their position as failed people. Now, it's kind of low-key about some of its otaku cred. Like, for instance, there's really only one moment where it directly mentions the word. At the beginning, when they're recalling the pretty boy, the ikemen who tries to hit on Marin, the subtitles say nerd.
ねえねえ、それなんとかってアニメのやつ？超オタクじゃん。
But the word he uses is otaku. But while my dress-up darling doesn't have the kind of stuff that you see in Genshiken or Otaku no Video where they go to events or slam episode... They do that. Oh, they do that too. Wait, no. No, they do all of that. Oh my god, no, she buys a camera, god damn! Though the show is a little more subtle about its otaku vibes, it does an exceedingly good job at tackling concerns through one of its protagonists, Gojo. Wow, what a surprise. Specifically because of what he is, someone who isn't otaku, but he's got a lot of otaku-like traits. Like, for example, otaku are really into database readings where they break stuff down and then, they figure it out from there. And Gojo, for the sake of his work, does something kind of similar. He's the one who really notices that Shizuku's hair is deep purple thanks to an intuitive awareness of the color coding in the game. But there's a bigger one, and it concerns his relationship with the Hina Dolls, because that isn't too far off from what psychologist Saito Tamaki considers a deep affinity for fictional objects. He talks to these dolls in a way you rarely see others in the show actually do.
持ってこれるし。今日重ね縫ってくからね。
He responds to them like they're living things. So, it's no surprise then that the first, and frankly one of the few people to speak to the Hina dolls the same way Gojo does, is Marin, someone who is otaku.
めっちゃ綺麗じゃん。目キラキラしてる。
And so it creates a situation where the train scene where he says Marin is beautiful, which, it's hell hype confession. I loved it. Oh, yes, I love this. But he's making a thematic connection. He's making a thematic connection between the real girl Marin and the fictional Hina doll. The fictional objects is even more important when you contrast Gojo's fascination compared to normie reactions to the dolls. His grandfather and Juju, they both have an appreciation of them, but it's mainly as a craft.
やっぱり目が止まるもの。不思議。
お客さんの笑った顔を見ると、やっててよかったなって思うしな。
For Gojo, the dolls are something to fall in love with. This relationship between a subject and their fictional desires comes at a head when he outrightly declares just how deeply the dolls affect him.
目が釘付けになってこんなに綺麗なものが世の中にあるんだって感動して
Now the student will see that and realize, okay, well, Joe's going insane because that's some sketch translation. That's kind of close, but that's not exactly what he says. Well, yeah, that's true. Because that isn't what Gojo says. That's not his words. It's this guy's. One of the great forefathers of the modern otaku, when he first saw Bainyang from Hakujana. But whereas someone like Miyazaki supposedly grew out of it, My Dress Up Darling stresses that there isn't really anything you need to grow out of. This is important because that position defangs criticisms on the antisocial and pathetic image that have plagued otaku, while simultaneously sliding into more general concerns on performativity. Gojo's character, for instance, is actually quite sympathetic to struggle for imagination, how alternative worlds and spaces are nurtured, and in doing so, it opens up new avenues of expression and belonging. That's really important. Just like how he's introduced to cosplay by an otaku, we are partly introduced to challenges to otaku identity through him. This allows the show to transition from otaku concerns to more broader concerns on identity, bridging otaku and more general audiences through sympathy. Their problems, it turns out, aren't the problems of far-off weirdos in Akiba or on netboards. They're problems shared by people everywhere because they're so transposable. I mean, they're the big ones, right? He's internalized a child's disgust for a really long time, and that shapes the way in which he behaves. For example, look at this scene. If this was an anime figurine, it wouldn't be that far off from normie criticisms of otaku sexuality. She calls him weird, and for a while he just kinda assumes he's weird. He's crafted a construction of a social world in which his own anxieties are already deemed true.
なるべく人前で俺とはいない方が
But, like an otaku, he's constantly negotiating how he's perceived versus how he wants to be perceived. For example, consider how he chooses to portray himself. Except for when he's a student, he's often presented as wearing workman's clothes, even when he's technically not working. He's producing the self-image of a craftsman. Gojo's awkwardness and his clothing are both performatives. He considers himself socially awkward and a craftsman, so he self-reinforces both. This is important because the show reminds us that this is an effect of reproduction. Gojo's behavior is oftentimes at odds with how he internalizes himself. Consider his identity. He comes off as a pretty regular anime guy. He's short-haired, he's clean, he's tall, he's got these big-ass hands. He actually looks like a character from another one of Fukuda's mangas, a rough and tumble construction worker who's in love with his little sister. Talk about otaku. And while he sees himself as strange, he's given arguably the best comedic timing in the show.
なんですって
He's actively reproducing effects in which he deems is the natural condition of him as a person. And in doing so, he serves as a soft transition into other cases of performativity. Juju's case is much more pointed. Prim and proper, well-dressed. She came from an all-girls school. But while Gojo can achieve his dream, Juju's is a bit different. She's always wanted to be a magical girl, but she herself grappled with the reality that she can never be a magical girl. Well, in the real world, of course. In the world of cosplay. In another world, the struggle for imagination can continue. And it's not just her. Gojo's hangups on masculine identity is really driven home in the manga when we meet Amane, a male crossplayer who reveals his backstory that he was bullied for looking wimpy. But even when he finds a sense of belonging in his hobbies, his college girlfriend finds him disgusting. Now, Amane is interesting because his history folds back more directly into otaku discourse. His case is reminiscent of famous crosplayers like Haruhi, someone who was widely mocked by both insiders and outsiders alike because he didn't fit the image of a cute Haruhi cosplayer.
This is awful. I don't care how much you like cosplay. Don't embarrass yourself. At least do Kyon. I want to see what this guy's private life must be like.
This guy, shouldn't he be embarrassed? Cosplay is a personal choice, but if you're going to go on TV, at least cosplay a male character.
Both are, in this case, crossplayers who use their bodies to challenge expected notions on their identities, and both sought spaces which will openly accept them on their terms. Now, Amane was able to laugh it off, but the fact that they had to deal with this in the first place is kind of fucked up. My dress-up darling is, in this sense, quite sympathetic, but also quite shrewd about otaku issues. Through Gojo, it expands the gravity and applicability of what are sometimes deemed subcultural concerns, two-dimensional complexes, dealing with your hobbies, questioning who you think you are, but what society says you should be. These are some of the questions at the heart of performativity, and realistically, we don't really need otaku discourse to deeply grapple with them, but it does acknowledge that there already is a firmament upon which things can be built. And through someone who is noticeably not otaku like Gojo, it expands the applicability to more general audiences. So, what are some of the effects of this narrative? Once it shows that performativity is everywhere, what do its subjects do? There's this idea that you should just be yourself, but what you are is often determined by what precedes and is sometimes beyond your ability to control. Identity is not only where you stand, but how you grapple and challenge it. And so the small moments where you push back can help define who you are. My dress-up darling is full of that. The hairdresser who insists on being called an older sister but doesn't fall into any of the major okama tropes. The shaishinju who conquers the limitations placed on her body to become a character she admires. The cousin who wore boxers and in the act of cross-dressing is the one who convinces his grandfather that it's not a big deal. The shop owner who misinterprets Gojo's interest but cheers him on anyways. And later on, during the pageant, when Marin dresses up as a man, Gojo tells her to act manly, to sell the image, which suggests that performativity is not so easily challenged, but in some ways has to be negotiated. And Gojo somewhat breaks out of that performative cage. He realizes that he's internalized a toxic identity. But it's appropriate because it was only thanks to newfound friends who helped act as a pushback, friends who accept him, friends who don't care about a need to play into the orthodox idea of men and women. Friends who he found, thanks enough to his experiences with her. This girl, an otaku.